Let's start off gently at number 10 with Dr. Manhattan and Detachment. The Watchmen by Alan Moore, released in 1986 through 1987, is one of the defining graphic novels out there. A realistic story of pathos, loss, and despair. All of the superheroes are flawed, but Dr. Manhattan proves that a weakness can be a state of mind, and is perhaps only a weakness due to others' lack of ability to perceive it. After John Osterman is vaporized by an intrinsic field experiment, he reforms himself. However, in the process, he becomes something else entirely. A being of near godlike ability who exists outside of time. A state that gradually detaches him further and further from humanity as he slowly forgets what it feels like to be a part of it. This detachment eventually leads to him not being able to be a superhero at all, due to a complete sense of apathy and inability to relate. Killing without feeling and unable to connect to anything, John eventually leaves the Earth behind to explore the universe's possibilities, but states he may return. So if your powers get to a point where you exist beyond morality, well, that's definitely a weakness for a superhero. But for a cosmic being, well, that depends entirely upon your philosophy. Something that is definitely a weakness in at number 9, we have Heroin, used by Speedy, aka Roy Harper. Not all weaknesses are unrealistic or magical, and not all of them have to come from the outside or from villains. Heroes are just as human as everybody else, as proved in Green Lantern and Green Arrow number 5 when the Green Arrow learned that his ward/sidekick Speedy was on heroin. This team-up series was a 70s attempt to have superheroes tackle some hard-hitting real-world issues, some of which have aged better than others. One thing that stuck was Roy Harper's drug addiction, which was really introduced to prove a point to Green Arrow that not only poverty-stricken kids were drug addicts. So really it wasn't a decision that had to do with his character, but other writers took it and really used it to develop Roy. His struggles came to emphasize that being a sidekick came with its own pressures and pitfalls, and that not everyone could cope with the superhero lifestyle. Roy eventually recovered, but is still in danger of relapsing. His New 52 origin changed him to a recovering alcoholic, and his rebirth backstory is still developing. However, if used correctly, Roy can be an example of the real-life struggles some people have to go through every day. Which is not the case with our number 8. We have Superman and high sonar frequencies. Superman gets a bad rep as being overpowered and lacking in weaknesses, which makes his fights boring. But he actually has a fair few weaknesses, it's just writers rarely exploit them. Of course, kryptonite is so well known, it's just become common parlance for any weakness. Another well-known one is red sun radiation, which basically weakens him down to a normal human level. But one not everyone thinks of is high frequencies, and it makes a lot of sense. Superman is Superman in many senses of the word. Keyword, senses. His are greatly enhanced, especially his hearing. He is able to pick up and distinguish individual heartbeats, so it shouldn't be surprising then that a high-pitched, well-directed noise blast pointed directly at him would prove crippling. Especially when you think about the fact that Jimmy Olsen's watch summons Superman by using a high-pitched frequency that blocks out all other noises briefly. This one is more of an extrapolation and less established firmly in lore, but really it sounds like a lot easier to build this kind of sonar machine than going on a quest for kryptonite, or trying to blot out the sun. But hey, you do you. Someone else who can't stand the noise is our number 7. Daredevil. Again, is this surprising? Well, it depends on the writer. Matt Murdock's second sight and how powerful it is really varies depending on who is writing him. Is he perfect and untouchable, or flawed and more human? Well, for one arc, the Daredevil's weakness was noise pollution, which for those not in the know is a harmful or annoying level of noise, such as from an airplane or industry. Now the thing with this one is that, well, the Daredevil has lived in a city pretty much his whole life. So the question is, does the noise pollution need to increase? Does it happen when he's in an unfamiliar area? How quickly can he adapt? Are his villains well enough aware of this to really use it against him? Based on how key hearing is to the Daredevil's ability to, well, see, this makes sense in theory, but in practice would need some pretty consistent rules to be an effective weakness. So I guess how rarely it is used or thought of could make it surprising. Up next at number 6, the Green Lantern's rings and the color yellow. So for a while, Green Lantern power rings were affected by the color yellow. This was for reasons that have changed over time. First, it was a design flaw, but it was later revealed to be because of an impurity within the central power battery. That was then said to be from the now Fear entity and not just insane Hal Jordan, Parallax. However, this latest update also allowed for the ring bearers to be able to overcome this weakness, rendering it inert. Because, well, most people thought it was silly, and it was. However, it did give us some hilarious panels, like Hal knocking himself out on a yellow billboard, or getting knocked out by a yellow lamp, or more recently in the extremely poorly executed All-Star Batman and Robin having to fight Batman in an entirely yellow painted room, facing a Batman who is also painted yellow, who is drinking lemonade. Ridiculous and hilarious. Something equally funny, at least with the covers they made for it, is our number 5, Aquaman and dehydration. Aquaman has it rough. People make fun of him all the time, be it for his silly costume and lame powers, which is odd when you think about it. Most of the Earth is his domain, and he has some pretty intense telepathic abilities and great combat skills. Maybe now that he's being played by Jason Momoa, people will stop making fun of him. I know I don't want to fight Jason Momoa, but I will fight Silver Age Aquaman, because in the late 50s, Aquaman had to come into contact with water every hour or he would die. This was a retconned weakness because prior to that, Aquaman could exist indefinitely out of water, and he would be able to do so again in the following decades. But for one brief moment, if you could keep Aquaman in the desert long enough, you would be victorious. It's pretty inconvenient to have to ride around such a handicap, so I can see why this one didn't last. I mean, I guess he could have had a utility belt full of water bottles. Still, it is surprising that some small aspect of this didn't linger. However, who knows, maybe in the future some part of it will come back. It could work if the time frame is less restrictive. Moving on to number 4, Captain Marvel, now currently Shazam, and his weakness, saying his own name. Shazam has had a long, complicated legal history with comparisons to Superman and also who has the rights to the Captain Marvel name, a battle which he obviously lost. But his creator's inability to win a lawsuit isn't his only weakness. Young Billy Batson gained his powers from a wizard he met in the subway system so that he could fight humanity's 7 greatest enemies, which were ideas, not actual villains. Things like greed, sloth, and envy. He could access his powers by saying the word Shazam, also the name of the wizard who granted him said powers. Upon saying the magic word, the 10 to 12-year-old, it varied, would transform into the adult Captain Marvel, a superhero with super strength, flight, and a sense of moral duty. Whether or not he kept his childish mind has varied over time, but to turn back into Batson, he also had to yell Shazam. The only thing, the transformation involved him being hit by lightning. He has used this to his advantage by yelling Shazam and trying to get his opponents underneath the lightning. However, this also means that he can accidentally turn himself back into Billy Batson mid-fight, or other people can make that happen, as occurred in the memorable Justice League Unlimited episode, Clash, which was super awkward because no one knew that he was actually a child. Now there's another lawsuit waiting to happen, but Shazam would probably win that one. Still, having a magic word everyone knows is key to your transformation, probably not the best thing for a well-known superhero. Another superhero whose weakness is pretty well known is our number 3, the Martian Manhunter. The Martian Manhunter is terrifying. His array of powers are just astounding. He can shapeshift, phase, elongate. On top of all this, he's a powerful telepath. He can not only read minds, but also link non-telepaths up using his own telepathy. He can use mind control, astral projection, possession, so why would anyone ever dare go up against him? Well, thankfully, he does have some weaknesses. One key one, that being fire. This weakness has been part of his character for a long time, but it's really inconsistent how much it affects him and when. But currently the most accepted reasonings are that it is a crippling phobia developed after witnessing the death of his race. It was a fear placed there by the Guardians of the Universe in the Trial by Fire storyline, but since the New 52, it just seems to be PTSD. John Jones, the Martian Manhunter himself, feels it's a silly fear to have, and many readers seem to agree. But hey, PTSD is serious business, and your hero has to have a weakness, otherwise it's just not a fair fight. Being able to pick up your opponent's weakness at the gas station though, makes the fight seem a little bit more appealing, but it's still terrible odds. However, your odds get a lot better if you have the required materials to fight our number 2, the Green Lantern again. Yes, but not Hal Jordan, this time we have to go back to the first purple cape-wearing Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Back in the 1940s, when Scott found a green meteor that told him how to construct a ring from its metal, Scott decided to fight crime, first seeking out the criminals who had caused a railway bridge to collapse where he worked. It was here he discovered this magical cosmic ring's one weakness: wood. Ordinary wood. He learns this when he is bludgeoned with a club. His ring could also not affect wood, which in the 1940s would have been a pretty big hindrance. So remember, phenomenal cosmic power can be defeated by going to the hardware store and getting a 2x4. Look, it was the 40s, comics were being pushed out like crazy and the expectations were different. There wasn't always time or demand for some deep backstory as to why a weakness was what it was. Some heroes' first comics don't even have their origins in it. Still, in hindsight, this is pretty hilarious. Which brings brings us to number 1, Wonder Woman. Okay, before we get into it, this one takes some explaining and isn't in use anymore. However, it is very much of its time, and it honestly still gets a bit of a bad rap. In the 1940s, when Wonder Woman was created, her weakness was specifically having her hands bound together by a man. Wonder Woman comics are notorious for the amount of bondage in these comics, particularly on the covers. Princess Diana is tied up left, right, and center. There were many reasons for this. One was to not scare off young male readers by making her appear too dominant. Another was that the creator believed that bondage was a healthy part of normal human relationships. As for this weakness, it's actually not as sexist as people think. The reason it was male specific was the symbolism. Wonder Woman explains that for an Amazon to permit herself to be chained by a man, she becomes as weak as any other woman in a man-ruled world. If you think about it, it's actually an extremely convoluted attempt to express why a woman should be careful about giving up her agency. It's simplistic and not as nuanced as it could be, but it has more reasoning behind it than a lot of comic book decisions being made at that time, like say, wood. In fact, the creator, William Moulton Marston, created her because he felt there was a void in comics for female superheroes. He wanted to make young girls feel good about being female. His attempts at Wonder Woman's character were based on trying to boost female self-esteem based on the understanding of gender norms of this time. He stated, and I quote, "Not even girls want to be girls so long as our feminine archetype lacks force, strength, and power. Not wanting to be girls, they don't want to be tender, submissive, peace-loving as good women are. Women's strong qualities have become despised because of their weakness. The obvious remedy is to create a feminine character with all of the strength of Superman, plus all of the allure of good and beautiful woman." Yeah, in hindsight, it's pretty silly for one of the strongest beings to be held in place by normal rope. So yes, his execution definitely needed a little work, but it has some solid reasoning behind it for the time. Still, for many, especially out of context, this is one surprising weakness. Number 10. Thor and Warrior Madness. Now, one would think that increased strength would be an advantage in a fight, but only if you retain your faculties, which is not what happens to Thor when he enters the state known as Warrior Madness. This occurs when he succumbs to the bloodlust of battle, completely losing himself to it, to levels of absolute insanity. This, while resulting in increased strength, diminishes his accuracy and ability to strategize. It also makes him liable to attack friends, teammates, and innocents. It also means for any villain who still has his faculties and dodges the initial attack, they can recoup and take him down with strategy. His intelligence at this level is so low that during his battles with the rage-filled Hulk, he actually loses. Sorry Thor, sometimes it's better to have brains than brawn. An odd one at number 9, Nightcrawler and Angel's Blood. That's right, Angel Blood. Why specifically? Well, that's because Nightcrawler is a Neopham. The Neopham are an ancient race of mutants who have a demonic appearance who happen to be led by Nightcrawler's father, Azazel. And this isn't angels like holy from heaven, this is blood specifically from Angel Warren Worthington, who yes has healing blood that can heal other people and himself, just not Nightcrawler. In fact, his blood will make Nightcrawler's injuries worse. So basically we have an angels and demon thing going on with mutants. Nightcrawler also has normal susceptibility to injury and the like, but this weakness to Angel's blood just makes him a bit more unique. One that often just perplexes people in at number 8, Superman and Magic. Superman, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, more powerful than a locomotive, faster than a speeding bullet, unable to withstand magical attack, because he needed more weaknesses? Why Superman is vulnerable to magic is kind of vague, but he definitely is. He can be taken down by Black Adam's lightning. He also easily succumbs to spells that alter his mental state. Although nitpickers claim really he's just as vulnerable as anybody else, but because of his usual power level, it just makes him appear like it's affecting him more. But I don't know, they actually don't take him on missions because of this, and they take Batman on magical missions. Maybe Superman just really can't fight with any kind of handicap. Also, the effects of this vary widely depending on the author, so it's not a very consistent weakness. Basically, it's no kryptonite. More magic at number 7. Zatanna and not being able to speak. As a magician, or sorceress, or witch, or whatever you want to call her, Zatanna's powers are magic based. However, her spells are activated by her saying whatever she wants to happen backwards, which means she has to be able to speak. She's fast, so it can be difficult to incapacitate her, but a swift blow to the neck or solar plexus will do it, as demonstrated by Deathstroke during Identity Crisis. Or if you're a magic conjurer, perhaps conjuring some tape over the mouth, that's also a good one. one, or catching her with her mouth full. These things are a lot about timing as a supervillain. You have to be creative. Number 6. Storm and claustrophobia. The mutant Storm has the power to control the elements. She's a huge asset in pretty much any fight. However, if you get her into a small space, everything changes. This is due to past trauma involving the death of her parents and her being trapped under the rubble next to their dead bodies. As a result of this, Storm has developed a crippling fear of small spaces. Being enclosed, or feeling like she's being enclosed, can result in a full-blown panic attack and leave her unable to fight until she is in a more open location. This level of realism adds a nice touch to her character. Sometimes all of us find ourselves immobilized by our own fears. More realism in at number 5. Iron Man and alcoholism. While Tony has long since overcome this as one of his foibles, though he does still struggle with it, the Demon in a Bottle storyline provided a very realistic and heart-wrenching storyline about a man falling apart and succumbing to his own demons. Stark's alcoholism obviously leaves him vulnerable to attack and unable to function properly as either Iron Man or businessman Tony Stark, and it also leaves his friends open to attack as well. While this was a brief moment in comics, it became a defining one for the character. Unlike a real alcoholic, Stark has had his relapses and has struggled to overcome them. But for all his weaknesses, it just makes him all the more relatable and human. Another attempt at relatability at number 4. Namor and pollution. Do you want to stop the King of Atlantis? Well, then you better start pitching your trash right into the ocean, because Namor is greatly affected by pollution. It makes sense, I mean pollution affects us all, but the way they treat it is very much like kryptonite, basically saying that if Namor is exposed to polluted water, it can negatively affect his physiology and efficiency of his physical abilities. For some, this is a bit too much realism, because if you think about it, then shouldn't land-based heroes be affected by the air quality in their cities? Well, probably, but that doesn't make for the best reading experience. It also doesn't really acknowledge the full extent of ocean pollution, which is just depressing. Pretty much every time Namor approaches almost any coastline, he should just be getting weaker and weaker. So basically, a well-placed oil spill can take Namor out of the equation, and this is starting to sound way too much like eco-terrorism, so let's just get out of here. Number 3. The Human Torch and asbestos. Now, as a Human Torch, anything that removes the oxygen from the environment, unless he's doing it, is not going to be great for this Fantastic Four member. But for a brief glorious moment, he had an opponent known as Asbestos Man. He created a flame-resistant armor out of super asbestos that let him actually defeat the Human Torch, who is no match for this flame-retardant carcinogenic material. And Asbestos Man doesn't even kill him. He wants him to live with the shame of being defeated by the Asbestos Man. However, the Human Torch ultimately defeats him in a rematch by sucking all of the oxygen out of the room. Knowing what we now know about asbestos, I think it's safe to say that we could all be taken down by the Asbestos Man. It would just take a long time. The Asbestos Man plays a long game. Number 2. Captain Britain and self-esteem. Captain Britain has a variety of heroic powers. Super strength, speed, stamina, durability, the ability to fly. However, ever since his death and resurrection, Captain Britain's powers have been tied to his emotions. If Captain Britain feels confident, well then his powers will function at their peak. If not, then he will literally lose his powers as he loses confidence, in a vicious cycle. So I guess if you taunt him enough or mess him up enough, you can pretty much cripple him. I feel like knowing this was your weakness would also stress you out even more. Captain Britain probably has some pretty high therapy bills. And number 1, get ready for it. Power Girl and any unprocessed materials. So what does that mean? Well, unprocessed material is any basic material used to produce goods, finished products, or energy. So pretty much anything. So throw a rock at Power Girl, she's down. Stab her with a branch, as occurred in the storyline where this was revealed, down. Ah, Wood, my old friend. We meet again. This was revealed during Peter David's run on Supergirl in Volume 4, Issue 16. This was during the period following Crisis on Infinite Earths when the multiverse was destroyed, so Power Girl was no longer an alternate version of Supergirl, and went through a confusing period of retcons, new origins, and bizarre weaknesses like this one. Since she has once more reclaimed her Kryptonian origin, this weakness is no longer an issue. But seriously, why was it ever? A pointy stick should not be able to take down a superhero unless you're having some kind of jungle-themed battle, a la Star Trek. Number 10. Swamp Thing and pollution. That's right, this weakness is crossing from the sea with Namor to the swamp with Dr. Alec Holland. Since his powers and abilities are directly plant-based, this makes sense. The quality of the water, plant life, and vegetation affects Holland's health and ability to manipulate the plant life around him. It's no wonder he's such a champion for the environment. Number 9. Deflator Mouse and cowardice. Oh, The Tick, such a great parody show. And one of its best characters is their Batman amalgam, Deflator Mouse, aka the Bat. He doesn't fight crime, he's too afraid. When they turn on his bat signal, he leaves town. When confronted with battle, he faints. Basically, he's in it for the credit and the press, but not to do any actual work. No, he'll leave that to the Tick.
Spoon!
Number 8. The Vision and getting too rigid. The Vision has the ability to alter his density. While useful in most combat situations, he can also do it past the point where he can move his muscles, pretty much turning himself into a stone immovable man. I mean, there are times I guess where being an immovable object would be good, but it seems like an odd strategy to employ in battle, and definitely something a villain could exploit if they gained control of him. Just cause him to increase his density to 90 tons and proceed with your crime spree. I mean, once you take out the rest of the Avengers as well. Number 7. Wonder Woman being bound by her own lasso of truth. Oh, classic Wonder Woman, we meet again. As discussed in an earlier part of this series, early Wonder Woman was made up of a bunch of contradictory ideas about femininity and female sexuality, and her comic featured a lot of bondage. Her getting tied up was a staple feature, but some people pointed out how come this only happened when men tied her up? Well, it wasn't just men, it was just men could tie her up with anything, but it was open season when it came to the lasso of truth. Being bound by her own lasso of truth made her submissive and susceptible to the person wielding its control. Over time this was phased out along with most of the bondage element. However, escaping her own lasso is still a hindrance due to its strength and mythological properties, which Batman has found a way to counteract, because of course he has. However, the implications of the lasso of truth are still interesting to explore, and writers do so from time to time, such as in the Elseworld story Superman Red Sun. Number 6. Plastic Man Extreme Heat / Acetone. Plastic Man has an extremely moldable body. Being created in 1956 means that they were going by a different definition of plastic than what we currently connote plastic with today. While Plastic Man can handle being frozen and the cold, physically at least, not emotionally, it really freaks him out, heat is something else entirely. Intense concentrated heat can actually melt him. This can also be accomplished by exposing him to certain chemicals like acetone. So if you have gallons of nail polish remover, which of course you do, you can melt Plastic Man. He'll regenerate, but only after these stimuli are gone. Poor guy, who wants to exist as a puddle of goo. Number 5. The Flash and not eating. Okay, this is serious business for everyone, but especially for the Flash, as he functions at such high speeds his entire system is sped up, and that includes of course his metabolism. He needs to constantly be refueling in order to maintain basic functions, yet alone optimal crime fighting ones. Some writers solve this by having the Flash carry granola bars with him, or frequently stop off for food as he runs, leaving money on the counters and the like, but the Flash has to eat. This is a weakness that makes a lot of sense, but isn't overly recognized. Not all the time at least. So basically, if you put the Flash in a giant hamster wheel with no way out and make him run with no food, he's not gonna do so well. From one eating themed weakness to another, at number 4 we have the Blue Beetle, Ted Kord, and weight gain. While heroes may be shown to have exceptional physiques that are meant to make us all curl up in a ball with envy, there would be a certain amount of physical prowess required for non-power based heroes. During Ted Kord's time with the JLI, the Justice League International, he became sort of a joke character and started hitting the snacks pretty hard, to the point where his costume no longer fit. As a result, he became less and less able to go out on patrol, and was often relegated to monitor duty, and his other heroes started to kinda make fun of him. This was actually the beginning of a good character arc where he decided to change his life and take charge, not wanting to be a joke anymore. Played for laughs, but also a nice moment to remind us that heroes struggle too. Can you imagine how much constant food discipline they must be employing? Tiring. Number 3. The Confessor and Vampirism. This would be the first Confessor, not the second, who was his sidekick Alter Boy. While Alter Boy wasn't a vampire, the first Confessor definitely was. He stalked the streets at night fighting crime. While he fights for penance, he is as susceptible to all traditional vampire weaknesses as any vampire. So his enemies would employ crucifixes, holy water, stakes, etc. to try and take him down. However, ultimately he sacrificed himself to stop an alien invasion, which involved him having to expose himself to sunlight. Paradoxically, his weakness has become his successor's strength, as people also think the second Confessor is a vampire, and as a result try to fight him with the same methods, which are of course useless. Number 2. Thor and letting go of his hammer for over a minute. So we need to travel back to some classic Thor for this. Back when Thor was also Donald Blake, a doctor existing as a mortal man, initially unaware that he was Thor. However, once it was revealed he was able to shift between the two forms. However, if Thor let go of his hammer for more than 60 seconds in battle, he would transform back into Donald Blake. So it was stated that the hammer was so small that Thor just kept it tucked into his belt at all times. Thank goodness so few people are worthy to lift the hammer, or Thor would find himself spending long long stints of time as Donald Blake. This weakness was ultimately removed, and Thor assumed his civilian identity by changing into regular clothes like everyone else. No phone booth for him though, he carried a duffel bag. And number 1, Ant-Man Hank Pym and dissociative personality disorder. For those who know Hank Pym, they'll know he's had many aliases: Ant-Man, Giant Man, Yellow Jacket, the Wasp. Well, over time, it was revealed that Hank Pym was severely mentally unstable, to the point where during one now never forgotten arc, he forgot he was Hank Pym, and instead thought he was Yellow Jacket. This sent him spiraling into paranoia, near villainy, and into domestic abuse. The worst thing about this is that firstly, the slap panel where he hits his wife was an accident, a miscommunication between author and artist. Next, whether it was an accident or not, nobody really tries to help him in canon. He gets kicked off the team and divorced. Like, he was really sick. He eventually recovered, because comics, but yeah, it's pretty hard to fight crime when you're not even sure who you are. Number 10. X-23 and the trigger scent. This is a specific chemical designed to make X-23 kill targets she is unwilling to. It does this by sending her into a berserker rage that renders her incapable of logical thought and distinguishing between friends and enemies. So yeah, stay out of her way. Although this seems like a bit of a desperate measure, and definitely not something they'd want to be in the room with when they set it off. A similar, if less intense, weakness at number 9. Damian Wayne and the killer instinct. The youngest Robin is one of those characters that people either love or hate, largely because of his precocious personality. Can you tell which I am? Raised up until his prepubescent years by the League of Assassins, Damian is very disconnected from feelings such as basic empathy, which is a great trait for an assassin, not so great for a hero. This means he has a tendency to go too far, and is constantly battling with himself to make the right decision. Well, for a hero anyways. Number 8. Black Widow and pregnancy. Who else remembers the infertility line that got Joss Whedon into a lot of trouble during Avengers 2?
You still think you're the only monster on the team?
Well, for Black Widow, pregnancy would force her to take immunosuppressants, which would suppress the serum that keeps her in prime physical condition. Which some might say, well, should you really be in high combat situations while pregnant anyway? But seriously, if you were enhanced and had to go from that to being even less enhanced and then also pregnant, that would be awful. Number 7. Miles Morales and inexperience. Now you may be saying that this is a factor for any hero who is just starting out, but couple that with Miles' youth at 14, and taking over the position from a very established hero, Spider-Man, and the fact that the story actually takes a lot of time to explore this, it makes Miles very unique. Miles has to grow and come through his mistakes and learn from them, and the audience does so with him. It's a weakness we get to see him overcome, which makes you more connected to him. It's no wonder he survived the disassembling of the Ultimates universe. Number 6. Kon-El and expending too much energy. Okay, so Kon-El, aka Superboy or Connor Kent, is only half Kryptonian since he is a fusion of human DNA to keep his clone matrix stable. Who that DNA comes from varies, but my favorite version is where it comes from Lex. However, this means he doesn't process as much yellow sun as Superman, also because he's younger. Hence, he's not as powerful, but it also means he can't try to expend the same amount of energy. Otherwise, his body will start feeding on itself at a rate he cannot sustain. At least when the writers want it to, and when he exists. Cause currently Superman's son from the pre-New 52 timeline, John Kent, is Superboy, and he's adorable. Number 5. Hawkeye and hearing loss. This is something you may have noticed is a prominent part of fandom, canon deaf Hawkeye, and you may have wondered why, especially if you're only familiar with the film versions. Well, Hawkeye actually sustained substantial hearing loss after a battle with Crossfire, which he had to learn to compensate for. And while it was briefly cured, he later had arrows jammed into his ears by the Clown. His hearing was modified thanks to hearing aids provided by Tony Stark, so it is possible to disorient him if those are suddenly taken offline. However, Hawkeye has had this going on since his childhood in some canons, so he's definitely learned to live with it and is still one hell of a marksman. Number 4. Hal Jordan and loss of will. So the Green Lantern ring is an emotion-based weapon, cause yes, willpower is being counted as an emotional state. So as a result, one needs to have some pretty extreme discipline to be able to manifest all of these constructs. So in theory, if one destroys a Green Lantern's confidence, the ring just becomes, well, a fancy green ring. This varies in terms of use, but was a key point in the DC animated film Doom as Batman's chief strategy for how to take down the Green Lantern. However, according to the New 52, Batman was just able to take Hal's ring off, so there's that. Number 3. Cyclops and the inability to control his powers. There's a reason Scott always wears a visor or extremely tinted sunglasses. Originally this was because of a physical and mental trauma which Scott briefly overcame but has since reverted back to needing his visor, especially after exposure to the power-enhancing Phoenix Force, which also rendered his powers unstable. For anyone familiar with Cyclops, based on how uptight he is, this is not surprising. He even tells people people on his team to stop joking as an executive command. He can't handle anything. He's the kind of leader who thinks he needs to be in total control to be effective. So it's no surprise his powers rebel. Calm down, Scott. It's all okay. Except not really, because he's dead now. Well, his older self, but not his younger self. But who knows, by the time you're watching this, he may have gotten better. Comics. Number 2. Doctor Strange and a 24-hour astral time limit. That's hard to say. Now, the astral plane is a dangerous place for anyone who travels there. The damage done to your perception of yourself can yield permanent damage to your physical form. For Doctor Strange, this means a 24-hour time limit on this plane before his body begins to deteriorate, which would leave his spirit with nowhere to return to. Also, his physical form must be kept safe during this time or he could end up stranded. So basically, yeah, the astral plane, serious business. Don't leave your body unguarded. And number 1, Wonder Girl and maternal depowerment. This applies to Cassandra Sandsmark. Zeus blessed Cassie's mother with the ability to take away her powers temporarily by touching her. This occurred after Zeus experienced the disobedience of his own children, specifically Heracles and Ares. However, with many changes and retcons, this is pretty much gone, because she doesn't get her powers from Zeus anymore. It's too bad, it was a funny way to literally keep her grounded.